Hi, everyone. It's Adriana Linares again, your host for LawTech Connect on Litera TV. Welcome to another great episode I know I say that I'm excited about everyone I talk to, but I'm like really almost fangirling over getting to talk to Ben Odom, who is a lawyer for NASCAR. Hey, Ben.
Hey, good morning, Adriana. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day. I always appreciate lawyers who will do this because having spent a lot of time with lawyers, I know how busy you are. So I really, really appreciate it. Ben, you have a very cool job that I want to get to in just a minute. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where'd you go to law school? Who is Ben Odom?
Good question. So I'm a native Floridian. I've grown up in Florida, a small little blue collar town in north central Florida in Lake City.
Sure.
There's not a ton there. It's dead between Jacksonville and Tallahassee, and graduated there, went over to Florida State over in Tallahassee,
Cool.
Did undergrad and law school there in Tallahassee. Really have a soft spot in my heart for Tallahassee, Florida, the Panhandle. Spent some good time there. Worked there while I was in law school. Worked there a little bit after I finished law school in a non-legal role. And then I moved to Daytona Beach for the job in 2006 and have been here ever since. So Daytona now feels like home to me.
Yeah, well, I'm not a native Floridian. I was originally born in Chicago, but thank God my mom hated cold weather. So I've been living in Florida my whole life. I'm 48. We came when I was 5. So I call myself a Floridian, and I love Florida. I love every part about Florida. I think is great. I don't
know why anybody would live anywhere else.
I know.
And the fact that, we live where people go on vacation. It's not lost on me. And I feel very fortunate to be able to do this.
Me too. And I love every corner of Florida. You know, like you said, I think Tallahassee is awesome and the Panhandle's great. Probably my least explored part of Florida as a Floridian, because it's kind of you can't get there from here. But I've had an apartment in New Orleans for several years. So now oftentimes we'll drive and stop and enjoy the Panhandle like I should have been doing when I was a teenager. And anyway, so I think that a lot of what Florida is defined by are some of our greatest feats, like the space program. We're going to give Disney a shout out because, Orlando wouldn't be there without Disney. And then there's NASCAR, which, NASCAR is one of those things that I think most people do not appreciate until they have been to a race. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I think how fortunate, look, like you said, I love Florida. So how fortunate that the France family set up shop here of all places and did this. And I've never taken somebody to a race that they're attending it for the first time. And about the third or fourth lap when the cars come by, and this is after they've been in the garage and after they've seen pre-race, and they kind of look at me and say, hey, I get it now. I didn't get it on TV. I didn't get it looking at it on, a device. But when you see it in person and it's got a little ambiance of everything. The cars, they sound different. There's the smell of the tires and the fuel. There's the excitement. They say, I get it now. And it's a sport that doesn't translate particularly well on TV until you've actually been there in person.
I totally agree. I had the great fortune several years ago of going up to Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400, the last Formula One race we had in the United States. This was a long time ago. I went to 3 races. It was amazing. A friend of mine worked for the law firm that represents the Speedway. So it was my first time.
Is that Ice Miller?
Yeah. It was Ice, and I think they still do. So
they do a really good job up there for the.
They're an Indianapolis-based law firm, and so my friend worked there, and we got to go, and it was so great. The whole thing's exciting. What I love about it is it's that day, and I'm sure it's the same in Daytona, but again, I'm embarrassed that I haven't been to one in Daytona. But when it's a race day, the whole city just lights up. It's just the energy in the city, and then you get inside and you're like, oh my God, these people are amazing. This experience is amazing. You're right. You're drinking beer, you're smelling tires, you're almost like deafened by the sound, but you love every second of it. So did you love NASCAR before you got the job there, or are you a bigger fan now that you've been, part of the family and working there?
I probably appreciate it more now.
Yeah.
that I've worked here a long time and understand how the business works and how this thing, how it became what it is.
Yeah.
I liked the sport. I grew up liking all sports. My dad was a really big fan of NASCAR.
Cool.
Like Lake City blue collar, he drove a big rig, worked on his own trucks. We had a quarter-mile dirt track about 20 minutes outside of where I grew up. He would take me there on the weekends. My parents got divorced early on, so I'd stay with my dad on, every other weekend, and we'd find something to do. And, about once a month, we'd go out to the dirt track. So I knew how the sport worked. I'd been to races and enjoyed it. And then coming in and seeing the inner circle and how it worked, it was eye-opening. And I just got a real appreciation for the people that put this thing together.
Can you give our watchers and listeners a little bit of background on the France family and how NASCAR got started and why it landed in Daytona? This is like one of my favorite stories about Florida. And so if you could recap it real quick, I'd love to have you tell us.
I think what makes NASCAR unique to any other sport, and NASCAR is a major sport. And I think that people that don't understand how big it is a major sport. It'll rival the Big Four all day. It's family owned and family run. Bill France Sr. started this in the 1950s, and they've been racing cars. We have a saying around here that the first day they ever had a car race was the day the second car was built. I mean, they've been racing cars forever, but it was, there may be a race somewhere here, and on the same day another race, and the same day a third race. And Bill Sr. was really the guy that understood, and you got to organize this, and we're doing it wrong, and we need to put everybody in the same place at the same time and have all our stars race together, and there's some money to be made on this. And they used to race on the beach here in Daytona, and we still got, there's a restaurant called the North Turn, and there's a restaurant called the South Turn, and where you see pictures of them racing on the beach, and Bill Sr. organized all that. So great. And he realized, in that kind of that 1950s time frame that, hey, this thing has a future, but we've got to get to permanent facilities. And Indianapolis Motor Speedway that you referenced had been running since the turn of the century, big 2.5 mile racetrack. And I mean, that was the facility. And so Bill Sr. built the Daytona International Speedway. It was the first racetrack he built. And he built it with his own money. He and his wife, Annie B. France, they financed it. They built it with their own money, partnered with the county, partnered with a lot of local people in town to get it done. And once it was built, it was a true, if you build it, they will come story. And nobody thought, and how are stock cars going to race on a 2.5 mile facility? And for people that don't follow how big a 2.5 mile facility is, it's its own city. You could fit every stick and ball sport in the state of Florida. You could fit it inside Daytona International Speedway. That's amazing. That big. And then he hit it, and it took off. And then from there, he built Talladega Super Speedway. And then you're talking about like in the early 1960s now. And then he built the Motor Racing Network, which was just AM, FM radio broadcasting the race. And his idea was, when we're racing at Talladega, I want people in Daytona thinking about racing. And vice versa. Cool. And then from there, he bought Darlington Raceway, and they were off and running. And Bill Sr. in the late 70s kind of passed it on to his two sons, Bill France Jr. and Jim France. And they've since, Jim France is still involved. Bill Jr. is no longer with us. He passed away in 2007. Jim France is still the chairman of the board for NASCAR. His niece, Lisa France Kennedy, is vice chairwoman of NASCAR. Awesome. And so it's on the third generation. And then Lisa's got a son, Ben Kennedy, who is senior vice president of strategy for NASCAR and is the fourth generation of France family management. So to have a sport like this and a business like this that's on its fourth generation of family ownership is pretty unique and pretty phenomenal. I mean, God bless America. I swear. Where else? It is the true American dream story, right? Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you've got your dream job. Tell me about the legal team and what goes on internally. You do special projects, I think you told me. Sure. It's got a fairly big legal department for a company this size. And some attorneys are based out of Charlotte. Some are based out of Daytona. I'm fortunate enough to be based out of Daytona. And I'd say at any one time, there's between 10 and 11 attorneys about that many paralegals and support staff that, and then plus a risk management department, plus a government affairs department. And they all kind of, as we, figuratively keep the wheels running of NASCAR from a behind the scenes from a legal department standpoint. And my role today is more related to special projects, some litigation management, business development type stuff. It's a role it's on the fringe of the legal department. It's outside of a little bit truly the legal department. I am an attorney, but it's a legal / business affairs role.
That's pretty cool. So you get to flex your brain in all kinds of ways that isn't necessarily just focusing on legal all day long.
I think that's right. I would say, and you've interviewed a lot of attorneys, and I've talked to a lot of attorneys in similarly situated positions. Mm-hmm. And I think NASCAR and International Speedway Corporation, the company I worked for before that, which was, an affiliate, and we've just gone through this merger, their ownership and their executive management team does a better job of anybody of incorporating their legal department into the business. And they have done a great job of treating us as valued partners, give us a seat at the table, strategic partners, and it makes our job a lot easier when we understand what is the vision, where are we at today, where do we want to go, and we've got a seat at the table on how to get us there. And I think because of that, it makes our job more fun, right? We feel much more engaged in the business. And we're not just some black box that let's send something to legal, check the box that we did it, but they're not really a part of it. Now, NASCAR's management and ownership does a really good job of integrating its attorneys.
That's amazing. Everything you're saying about this company, this organization sounds just incredibly refreshing and interesting, and so well run. And you don't ever hear about a lot of scandals coming out of now. I mean, you can certainly have social scandals, but as far as business or legal issues, it just sounds like it's such a well-run company. They've done such a good job. And yeah, I think you are super lucky to have such a seat at the table and be able to do that. I can't imagine how many lawyers only wish that was, how they got to flex their legal muscles and be able to do that. So when it comes to special projects, can you give us an idea of what that one of those might be? Like, do you work on contracts? Is there international work?
There's yes to everything. There's probably not, there's not a ton. I mean, I've been here in some capacity or another since 2006. So there's probably not a ton of stuff that I haven't worked on from.
What great experience.
It's been phenomenal. So there's got to be a contract to set up the portable restrooms at the racetrack. I've worked on portable restroom contracts all the way up to, significant land deals. So,
right. I was thinking about that too. There has to be a real estate element involved. There must be a public health element involved at this point. And I can't imagine trying to navigate the whole crazy COVID scene, when you all are dying to reopen.
And we were, give NASCAR a ton of credit. They were the first sport back. Yeah. And I think NASCAR, we ran without fans at first, and then we're the first to have fans back. We had fans back in May of last year at our track at Homestead. And I think that was an industry coming together. What's a little bit unique about NASCAR to the sports, we don't have, contracts with labor unions. Our competitors are not part of a labor union. They're independent contractors of race teams that then they, sign up to race, individual races with NASCAR. NASCAR doesn't own all the racetracks. They own most of them, but they don't own all of them. So you've got a full industry of track promoters, NASCAR, and the race teams, and they all had to come together to figure out how do we keep this sport on the rails during the biggest crisis that any of us have ever dealt with, and how do we do it safely? Right. And the entire industry rallied together. And look, I think Jim France deserves all the credit in the world. I mean, he was the tip of the spear for this is what we want to get done. That's Steve Phelps, as the president of NASCAR, took that and led an incredible team. And look, it took everybody. It took the public affairs department. Yeah. It took Steve O'Donnell's department of, he's the head of competition. It took everybody at a race team. The amount of collaboration to put that back on was incredible. And the legal department was one small piece of it, but And we were here every day grinding it out, doing it was up to all of us to do whatever it took to get cars on the track again.
That's pretty impressive. No, I love it. Tell me about, so when the pandemic did start and you have this, distributed organization that was probably used to going into the office, and is your office, is it at the Speedway?
My office is an office building across the street from Daytona International Speedway.
That's
and
cool.
We've got a retail dining and entertainment development centered around the office. So if you look out the window, you can see it. There's a Bass Pro Shops that it's on land that we own and we develop and lease it out. So we've got a couple of hotels, a movie theater, a Bass Pro Shops, condominiums, kind of all around the office complex here.
That's amazing. Was the France family, sorry to backtrack, but the history is pretty cool. Was the France family from Florida?
No, they weren't. They weren't. They were from, if I understand right, I think they were up in the Northeast. I don't know exactly where Bill Sr. and Annie B were from, but they made their way down to Ormond Beach and got this thing started. Thankfully, in a warm weather climate. Thank
God. Right. And it's also interesting. The geography down there is what made it perfect to be able to race on the beach, which I think, most people don't know. That the thing is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the beach was long, flat, and hard. And it was hard to find a straightaway in Florida that had that. So I think that's why they started. And we still drive on the beach today in Florida, which is again, back to my favorite things about Florida is we've got that stretch of 30 miles between Daytona and Ormond. I think it's about 30 miles. It might be less. Oh, New Smyrna up, that we get to drive on the beach and park our cars and make schlepping to the ocean a lot easier. So that's very cool. Let me back up a little bit because you mentioned this complex that is also part of the business. So back to thinking about all the different elements of, it's like an empire then. It's not just a business and it has all these cool components to it. I think that's great. And Daytona is highly underestimated. I grew up going to Daytona because I went to Stetson. So,
okay. Yeah. Right down the road.
Yeah. Right down the road. So that was where we always went and hung out. And I think it's a great city. And I mean, we had that hurricane come through many, many years ago that I think helped really redevelop a lot of Daytona, but it is a great city and it's warm.
I think Daytona is and when I say Daytona, the greater Daytona area, from New Smyrna up to Ormond, it is an underappreciated place. And I think it gets a spring break wrap to it or a bike week wrap to it. But it's underappreciated. And there's some founding fathers of this area. I mean, you've got the France family with NASCAR. You've got Hyatt Brown, former Speaker of the House of the state of Florida, that owns and his family runs Brown and Brown Insurance. And what at Halifax Health, is a major hospital chain that's here. Advent Health is a major hospital chain that here, and they take the community serious. And the amount of give back to the community to revitalize this place, like you said, after the hurricane. I tell you, this place looked a lot different than when I first moved here, and it looks different for the better.
We shouldn't say this out loud. I always tell people when they're like, think about moving to Florida. How's Florida? I'm like, hot, humid, mosquitoes, gators. No, we don't need any more people in Florida. And especially in this little undiscovered enclave that I agree with you is very cool. So sorry, I interrupted myself because I'm a Floridian. That's what I jokingly call myself. And I love talking about Florida. How did the group, everyone, it's not just a group, it's a large organization, deal with the pandemic? Did everyone work remotely, and did you have to figure out technology, or was there a little bit of, coming into the office, masks on? Well, depending on where you lived, I think.
It's a good question. For the most part, and you got to remember, so we've got the main NASCAR office here in Daytona. We also have a major NASCAR office in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Research and Development Center in Concord, North Carolina. Smaller office presences for NASCAR in New York and California. And then every racetrack has an administration office where we've got employees. So that goes from Southern California to Arizona, Kansas, Watkins Glen, New York. So all over the place. And so in addition to, you got to do what's right, you also, every jurisdiction had their own guidance and restrictions on what could be open and what couldn't.
Yeah, right.
And so I'll just speak for Daytona. We, when Governor DeSantis issued the shutdown in last April, everybody. And I think we had done it before because you clearly had this public health crisis that nobody really knew what was going on. And everybody's situation was different. You got some employees that they've got kids that are out of school. They can't come to work. They got home life stuff to take care of. Some of them have elderly parents. Some of them are elderly themselves. So I think anybody that had a personal situation and the deal was, look, we're going to figure it out and we're going to do what works for you and make sure that, look, you're going to have to do your job, but we're going to make sure you can do your job in a safe, comfortable manner. And that's the trust we have. And then we're going to trust you not to take advantage of it. And there may be somebody that took advantage of it, but I'm not aware of it. I think everybody really leaned in and did what was necessary. Our technology department is run by a gentleman named Craig Neeb. His team worked miracles.
So cool.
Not everybody had laptops. Not everybody even had, the necessary infrastructure at home to work from home. And they did whatever was necessary for people to be able to do their job from home. There was a small group of us that, look, I don't have kids. I don't have elderly parents. I'm not there's no reason I can't come into the office.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's a small group of us that we were able to come into the office and function, but I think we figured out what works for everybody else. And technology, look, I'd never heard of Zoom until this time last year. Now we jumped on and now we've got rooms where you can come in and do conferences like this, and it was seamless. I think everybody was patient with each other and understood, hey, look, there's some times where, hey, look, 8:30 in the morning might not work for somebody because they're homeschooling their kid. But we'll figure it out and work around it. And it didn't take that long to kind of settle into it. I think what the bigger driver of anxiety or frustration was I don't think anybody anticipated it lasting this long.
Right.
I think it was, hey, look, we're going to have to work from home for a couple of weeks and then we'll kind of get this thing figured back out. And it just kept going. And now I think people are ready to get back and ready to resume some sense of normalcy. But I would say every day felt a little bit different. And then we had to figure out how to get the show back on the road. We had to race. What states are we allowed to race in? Right. And it was a very political environment last year too. Right.
Yeah.
So there were some states, their governor was not going to let anything open up. There were some states where we were going to be allowed to. And so that's where the public affairs team did a really good job of figuring out, what are the opportunities here? And look, we've got a TV contract that says you got to race 36 times. We're going to get 36 races in. And we went to work on figuring out how to do it. And I think it was about this weekend last year, we got cars on the track back again at Darlington Raceway in South Carolina, and we're off and running from there.
What does NASCAR stand for?
The National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing. I feel like that's a quiz. Like everybody has. I knew that.
I just wanted everyone else to know because it's funny. We always hear these names, and oftentimes we don't realize it's an acronym. But it's just so beautifully behind you. I wanted to ask. Can I ask you about the internal dispute resolutions that go on when there is a dispute on the track? Because I think what's interesting is, Facebook has been in the news for the past few days for having this internal superior court, as they call it. And I've heard that NASCAR, or at least the races, have something similar. When there is a dispute, you don't pull the lawyers in. There's some sort of internal board or body that helps decide those disputes. Is that true?
It is. Yeah, there's a motorsports appeals panel. And there's a whole review and appeals process. So like at the race, NASCAR is the officials and they've got a whole competition team and they run the race and they have to make balls and strikes calls for the race, penalties, scoring situations, technical inspection, pre-race, technical inspection, post-race, and then they've got to enforce penalties if you don't meet technical inspections. And there's an appeals process. If NASCAR institutes a penalty that a team doesn't like, there's a full appeals process, and there are different levels that you go up. And it's not just NASCAR. NASCAR is not the judge and the jury. There's a full motorsports appeals panel that's got people from, manufacturers, other series, other experience in the sport to make sure that there's at least a fair hand being dealt to the teams and the drivers.
That's so cool. So interesting. It's kind of, I keep hearing and learning about these internal bodies that work like this. So I interviewed a military attorney, actually two of them, and the internal workings of military court it'll blow your mind. I mean, if you haven't heard about it or learned or studied, you should just do a little research on that. It's amazing. So yeah, I had always heard that. And I think that's really cool. Tell me, how's the legal department laid out? Is there a GC and then lawyers below that and paralegals? And so is it like a normal law department inside NASCAR outside of maybe, I don't know if you work in the legal department or do you work in special affairs, give me the layout.
Sure. You've got a chief legal officer that's been the chief legal officer. His name's Gary Crotty. He's been the chief legal officer for NASCAR for a long time. He's been a very trusted advisor for the France family. He's got a general counsel that reports to him. And the way that she set it up is she's got, and again, like a lot of this changed after the ISC NASCAR merger, which was completed in 2019. So I would say all the companies still a little bit work in progress of figuring out how this kind of merged entity is going to work. And the pandemic changed some of that, or maybe delayed stunted some of that growth. But so the chief legal officer has a general counsel, and I think she's got 3 attorneys that report directly to her, and they've got line of sight over certain areas of the business. So one is primarily competition related, one is primarily sponsorship and media related, one is I would say governance and facilities related. And then they've each got a couple of attorneys and paralegals under them. And then the chief legal officer also has the head of the risk management team that reports to him. And I think has the head of public affairs that reports to him as well. And so I'd say the legal family is probably, think of it as a 3-legged stool. It's government affairs, risk management, and the legal department. They all work together fairly close. I'm not in that chain. I report to the chief legal officer and am involved in legal work with the attorneys, but maybe a little bit of an outlier, and maybe don't. I still consider myself a part of the legal department, even if it's not in a traditional role.
They're like, who should work on this? Give it to Ben.
Yeah, he's not smart enough to say no.
He's smart enough to figure all this other stuff out, but he's not smart enough to say no. Well, I just think it sounds so cool, and the experience you're getting. I'm sure you're going to work there till you die, because it sounds like the type of job and the type of company where somebody has to die before you can get in. So I think that's really cool. And I think, what I always like to remind younger attorneys is, and tell me if you think this is true, if you can practice in an area that you have interest in, that you're passionate about, that you love going to work for, isn't your life better?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I've been fortunate. I've worked for the Bowden family in Florida State football. I've worked for the France family in NASCAR. That's my experience. I don't have a lot to compare it to. I would say when you work in a place, when you work in a place that, like, if you're a fan of a sport, or you're a fan of NASCAR, or you're a fan of something, you do take when you work there long enough, you look at it through a different lens.
Yeah.
And I watch racing different than I did before I worked at NASCAR. I watch football different than before when I worked in football. It's just, it's different. And so it's not like I'm at the races every week, or I'm not sitting in the stands drinking beer every week. And then when I am at the race, I have a certain level of responsibility I try to take. I think where I'm more fortunate, the reason that I really like that, I love the product on the track. Don't get me wrong. I get that it's awesome to work at a place where I appreciate the product on the track. And it's one of the few jobs where I could work on something. And then when my grandma used to visit Daytona, I could show her something that I worked on. Hey, look at that sponsorship over at the track. I worked on that. That's really cool for a grandma, right?
Yeah.
That being said, if the people here were awful or frustrating, or like you described, like
right.
I've never had to be in a situation where I've had to question, you know what, my integrity says I need to do this, but the company wants to do this, or, hey, I'm scared to have this conversation. I've never been in that situation.
That's
this
awesome.
Company, the management, the ownership of this company, it's pretty clear look, we've got complicated issues, but they all want to do the right thing. And I think that nobody's perfect and no company's perfect. And we've all got our frustrating days and you don't get along with everybody. And I mean, so there's not this utopia, but it's pretty good. And I think if it weren't for the people that I work with and work for and work around, that part would be, I don't know that it would matter that it's a sport or that it's an iconic brand or anything like that. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but it really is to me more about the people and what we're working on than it is kind of the end product.
It's a great answer. And you're right. And I always get very rose-colored glasses when I say those types of things. So it's nice to bring me back down to earth and remind me that sometimes there's some reality that has to be dealt with. So Ben Odom, it has been very, very cool talking to you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day in beautiful Daytona Beach.
Adriana, thanks for having me. I'm always flattered when folks reach out, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And if it goes well, I'd love to do it again sometime. Or look, there's a ton of attorneys around NASCAR that I'm sure would be willing to do the same thing and give you a different perspective. And they probably are. I'm happy to make introductions. They're probably a lot smarter than me and can give a lot better answers than I can. So happy to make introductions and get some more NASCAR folks on for you.
That'd be awesome, Ben. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.